Words hold a power far greater than most people realize. They shape our perceptions, define our relationships, and set invisible boundaries that either protect or expose us. When it comes to dealing with narcissists, words are not just a form of communication, they are strategic tools. Every sentence you speak either reinforces your self-worth or hands over control. Psychological boundaries are often invisible, but the words you choose make them undeniably real. They draw a clear line between what is acceptable and what is not, signaling to others how they can and cannot treat you. In relationships with narcissists, this becomes even more crucial. Narcissists thrive in blurred boundaries. They manipulate through confusion, emotional chaos, and power imbalance. Their goal is to dominate the psychological space between you, to twist conversations until you begin doubting yourself. But when you use words with precision and authority, you reclaim that space, you shift the dynamic from reactive to proactive, from defensive to assertive. Boundaries stop being abstract concepts and become living structures built through language. A narcissist's greatest weapon is often not what they do, but how they make you feel. They use subtle digs, gaslighting, interruptions, or dismissive comments to chip away at your confidence. Over time, these verbal tactics condition you to tolerate disrespect, to question your reactions, and to soften your language so you don't cause a problem. But this is exactly what strengthens their control. By avoiding firm language, you unintentionally signal that your boundaries are negotiable. Psychological boundaries become fragile when your words are vague, hesitant, or apologetic. Using strong, clear words changes everything. Statements like, "I won't accept that," "This behavior is not okay," or "Stop talking to me like that," are not confrontations, they're declarations. They don't ask for permission, they don't justify. They simply state reality with authority. Narcissists rely on your fear of confrontation to maintain power. When you speak directly, their tactics lose effectiveness. The moment your words become firm boundaries, the psychological game they depend on collapses. Think about how many times you've softened your message to keep the peace. You might have said, "I don't really like that," instead of, "That's unacceptable," or perhaps, "I'd prefer if you didn't," instead of, "Stop doing that." This linguistic softening seems polite, but to a narcissist, it's an opening, a signal that they can keep pushing. Narcissists do not respond to emotional hints, they respond to power dynamics. Clear language communicates power. Ambiguous language invites manipulation. The way you use tone also plays a vital role. A calm, measured voice carries more authority than yelling or pleading. Narcissists expect emotional reactions because that's where they operate best. If you shout, they'll accuse you of being unstable. If you beg, they'll feel superior. But if you speak in a neutral, unwavering tone, they're forced to confront something. They cannot easily manipulate clarity. Your words become like a mirror, reflecting their behavior back to them without distortion. Another key aspect of using words as psychological boundaries is consistency. Setting a boundary once is not enough. Narcissists will test, probe, and push repeatedly to see if you truly mean what you say. Every time you enforce your boundary through language, you strengthen it. Every time you let it slide, you weaken it. This is why repeating clear statements like, "I already answered that," "We're not discussing this again," or "This topic is closed," is so powerful. Repetition doesn't make you rigid. It makes your boundaries unmistakable. There's also a psychological shift that happens inside you when you begin using strong language. Many people grow up associating firmness with aggression or guilt. They fear that being direct makes them rude or mean. Narcissists exploit this conditioning by framing your boundaries as overreactions. But the truth is, setting verbal boundaries is a form of self-respect, not aggression. The power of words lies in their ability to align your inner sense of worth with your outer expression. When your language reflects strength, your mind begins to believe it more deeply, and others start treating you accordingly. Strategic silence can also be part of your verbal boundary setting. Sometimes the most powerful words are the ones you don't say. When a narcissist tries to bait you, staying silent can be more unsettling to them than any argument. Silence communicates that their tactics have no effect. It's a boundary that says, I will not engage on your terms. But silence works best when paired with previous verbal clarity, so they know exactly what line they've crossed and why you're disengaging. Psychological boundaries built through language also protect your emotional energy. When you use precise words, you avoid getting trapped in circular conversations designed to drain you. Narcissists love to derail discussions, provoke emotional reactions, and make you defend yourself endlessly. Clear statements end that loop quickly. Phrases like, that's your opinion, I disagree, or we're not going in circles, close the door on their manipulative conversational patterns. Your words become a shield, preserving your energy and focus. Ultimately, words are the architecture of boundaries. They shape the invisible walls that protect your mental space. Each word you choose either reinforces your strength or erodes it. When dealing with narcissists, this is not just communication, it's psychological strategy. Boundaries spoken clearly are harder to challenge. They create a stable framework where manipulation cannot thrive. When you master the use of language as a boundary, you stop reacting to disrespect and start defining the terms of engagement. Your words become not just sentences, but shields and swords in the invisible battle for your dignity and peace. Narcissists thrive on carefully constructed illusions. Everything about their identity is built to control how others perceive them. An image of superiority, charm, confidence, and untouchability. But beneath this facade lies a fragile, insecure core they work tirelessly to hide. This is why exposure is their greatest fear. When their mask slips and others catch even a glimpse of their true motives or emotional vulnerabilities, it threatens the entire power structure they've built. Understanding this fear is crucial because it reveals the psychological pressure points that shape their behavior and their reactions to boundaries. At their core, narcissists depend on external validation to maintain their inflated self-image. They craft personas designed to attract admiration and obedience, whether that's the charismatic leader, the misunderstood genius, the victim, or the moral authority. These personas are not authentic, they're strategic. Every interaction is a performance aimed at reinforcing their narrative. When someone sees through the performance and names the manipulation, the narcissist's illusion starts to crack. This crack is dangerous for them, not just socially but psychologically, because their self-image is not stable. It's held together by the constant reinforcement of others. Exposure disrupts this reinforcement and forces them to confront a reality they desperately avoid. This fear of exposure is why narcissists often react with extreme hostility when confronted. Even gentle truths can provoke disproportionate rage. If you calmly point out an inconsistency in their story, question their motives, or refuse to play along with their manipulation, it threatens their carefully maintained mask. They can't tolerate this because exposure equals vulnerability, and vulnerability equals loss of control. In their psychological framework, control is survival. Losing it is intolerable. Narcissists will go to great lengths to prevent exposure. One of their common tactics is preemptive image control. They smear others before they can be exposed, portraying themselves as victims and anyone who challenges them as unstable, jealous, or malicious. This is why people often find themselves unfairly discredited or isolated when they try to speak up about a narcissist's behavior. The narcissist spreads their version of the story first, shaping the narrative to ensure that if the truth emerges, it will be dismissed as lies or emotional overreaction. This manipulation of perception is their defense system against exposure. Another tactic is deflection. When someone gets close to revealing their true nature, narcissists redirect the focus. They might accuse the other person of the very behavior they're guilty of, shift the topic to something unrelated, or create sudden drama to change the emotional atmosphere. This tactic works because it confuses the conversation and puts the other person on the defensive. Instead of continuing the line of truth, the focus becomes the narcissist's new accusation or emotional outburst. The exposure threat is neutralized by distraction. The fear of exposure also explains why narcissists are obsessed with control over narratives. They are constantly scanning for potential threats to their image. This is why they react so strongly to boundaries, truth, telling, or emotional clarity. Because each one threatens to reveal their manipulations, they carefully choose environments and relationships that allow them to maintain dominance. They gravitate toward people who are empathetic, self-doubting, or eager to please, because such individuals are less likely to confront them openly. They avoid or quickly devalue those who see through them easily. It's important to understand that narcissists are not afraid of being found out. In the moral sense, they're afraid of losing power. Exposure strips away the illusion they depend on to control others. When their manipulation is named clearly and confidently, they lose their psychological leverage. People start questioning their narrative, their charm falters, and their emotional hooks lose effectiveness. This is why truth, spoken calmly and without fear, destabilizes them so profoundly. The fear of exposure is also tied to their fragile ego structure. Deep down, narcissists carry immense shame, often buried under layers of denial and projection. This shame comes from an early developmental wound. The belief that their authentic self is inadequate, unworthy, or unacceptable. To survive this, they construct a false self-image that demands admiration and suppresses vulnerability. Exposure threatens to bring that buried shame to the surface. Even a subtle hint that someone sees through their mask can trigger panic, rage, or vindictive behavior. Their reaction is not rational, it's defensive and automatic, a desperate attempt to protect the false self from crumbling. One of the most effective ways to disrupt a narcissist's control is to expose patterns rather than incidents. If you confront them about a single lie or manipulation, they can deny, deflect, or gaslight. But when you calmly point out repeated behaviors, establish clear facts, or use their own words to reveal contradictions, You corner their narrative. They may lash out, but inside, this triggers their deepest fear. That someone understands the structure of their manipulation, not just the surface details. This kind of exposure is far harder for them to escape. This fear also drives their obsession with appearances. Many narcissists work relentlessly to project an image of perfection, success, or moral superiority. They control how they're seen in public, on social media, and within social circles. Any threat to this curated image, whether it's a truthful comment, a boundary, or simply someone refusing to play along, can set off their defensive mechanisms. Exposure doesn't have to be loud. Even silent non-compliance with their narrative can feel threatening to them. Because exposure is so dangerous to their sense of control, narcissists often retaliate aggressively when they sense it approaching. They may intensify manipulation, isolate you from allies, launch smear campaigns, or use emotional blackmail. This reaction is not because they are powerful, but because they are terrified. The more they fear being seen clearly, the more desperate their tactics become. This is why people who expose narcissists often face intense pushback, not because the narcissist is invincible, but because they're fighting to preserve their illusion at all costs. The fear of exposure reveals the truth about narcissistic power. It's fragile. It depends entirely on deception, emotional fog, and other people's willingness to believe the mask. The moment the truth is seen and spoken clearly, that power begins to erode. This is why clarity, calmness, and truth-telling are so threatening to them. They are not equipped to handle being truly seen, because everything they build depends on not being seen for who they really are. Detachment is often misunderstood. Many people confuse it with coldness, indifference, or lack of emotion. But true detachment is none of these. In psychological and emotional terms, detachment is the ability to remain centered and stable regardless of external chaos. It's the capacity to observe situations objectively rather than getting pulled into emotional whirlwinds designed to destabilize you. When dealing with narcissists, detachment becomes one of the most powerful forms of self-protection, because narcissists rely on your emotional reactions to control the dynamic. The moment you stop feeding that loop, their strategies begin to lose their grip. Narcissists are masters at provoking emotions. They know how to push buttons, twist words, and create situations that make you feel defensive, guilty, angry, or confused. This is not accidental, it's deliberate. Emotional reaction gives them power. When you react, they can redirect the conversation, manipulate your perception, or use your response as evidence against you. But detachment removes this leverage. When you stop reacting emotionally, they can no longer use your feelings as tools. Detachment is not about suppressing your emotions internally. It's about not allowing those emotions to dictate your external behavior or decisions. Detachment begins with understanding the game narcissists play. They thrive in emotional chaos because it allows them to dominate the psychological space between you. If they can keep you on the defensive, they control the narrative. If they can make you doubt yourself, they weaken your boundaries. But when you adopt a detached mindset, you step out of their game entirely. You observe their behavior instead of participating in it. You stop trying to change their mind or prove your point. This mental shift is subtle but incredibly powerful. One of the most noticeable signs of detachment is emotional neutrality. When a narcissist tries to provoke you with insults, guilt trips, or baiting statements, you respond calmly or not at all. This doesn't mean you allow disrespect. It means you address it without emotional escalation. For example, instead of defending yourself when accused unfairly, you might simply say, "That's not accurate," and leave it there. Instead of matching their raised voice, you keep yours steady and measured. This unnerves them because they expect emotional resistance, not clarity. Narcissists depend on predictable reactions to maintain control. Detachment makes you unpredictable. Detachment also involves setting internal boundaries. External boundaries are about what you communicate to others, but internal boundaries are about what you allow to affect your inner world. You can't always stop a narcissist from saying hurtful things, but you can choose not to absorb those words as truth. You can decide that their projections are not your reality. This internal decision shifts the power dynamic dramatically. When their words no longer penetrate your emotional core, they lose the ability to destabilize you. Another crucial aspect of detachment is letting go of the need to win. Narcissists thrive on arguments that go in circles because they're not seeking resolution. They're seeking dominance. If you try to win against them using logic, empathy, or explanation, you'll often end up drained and confused. Detachment frees you from this trap. You stop trying to convince them. You stop expecting understanding or accountability. You start recognizing that their behavior is not about you, it's about their internal world. This realization allows you to conserve your energy and choose when and how to engage. Detachment doesn't mean you become passive. In fact, it often makes you more effective. When your decisions are not clouded by emotional reactivity, you can respond strategically. You can choose your words carefully, set firm boundaries, or walk away entirely without guilt or hesitation. Detachment gives you clarity. You start seeing patterns clearly, understanding motives, and identifying manipulation without being swept up in it. Narcissists rely on fogging your perception through emotional intensity. Detachment clears that fog. One of the most empowering elements of detachment is learning to tolerate discomfort. Narcissists often use discomfort as a weapon through silent treatment, rejection, criticism, or public embarrassment. They expect you to rush in to fix, explain, or please in order to relieve that discomfort. But when you are detached, you can sit with the unease without giving in. You can allow their silence to stretch without chasing. You can hear their criticism without crumbling. You can face their disapproval without feeling compelled to explain yourself. This tolerance breaks their emotional leverage because discomfort is one of their main control mechanisms. Detachment also involves emotional self-responsibility. It's recognizing that your feelings belong to you, not to them. Narcissists often try to make you responsible for their moods, expectations, and emotional states. They say things like, "You made me angry," or "If you loved me, you would." Detachment allows you to see these statements for what they are, attempts to shift responsibility. You can acknowledge their emotions without accepting blame for them. You can care without becoming controlled. This distinction is critical for maintaining psychological independence. Another layer of detachment is not personalizing their behavior. Narcissists project their insecurities and internal chaos onto others. If they insult you, it's usually a reflection of their own inadequacies. If they devalue you, it's because they need to feel superior. When you personalize these actions, you end up internalizing their dysfunction. But when you detach, you understand that their behavior is about them, not you. This shift allows you to maintain your self-esteem even in the face of repeated provocations. Detachment is also a form of quiet resistance. Narcissists expect drama, emotional outbursts, or desperate attempts to fix the relationship. When you give them none of that, they lose their ability to script the interaction. Your silence, calmness, or minimal response becomes unsettling to them because it removes their usual footholds. They may escalate temporarily, trying to break your composure, but if you remain steady, their tactics lose power over time. True detachment often grows from self-awareness and self-trust. You begin to trust your perceptions instead of questioning them every time they contradict the narcissist's narrative. You rely on your internal sense of reality rather than external validation. This self-trust is what makes detachment sustainable. It's not about building emotional walls. It's about standing on solid ground internally. When you're rooted in your own clarity, their storms don't sweep you away. Detachment gives you the ability to put your responses deliberately rather than being dragged into reactive patterns that serve their control language is more powerful than most people realize. It doesn't just communicate thoughts, it shapes dynamics, establishes psychological space, and defines the terms of interaction. When used intentionally, language can create invisible boundaries that protect your emotional well-being without needing to raise your voice or engage in endless debates. These boundaries are not drawn on paper or marked with signs. They are woven into the structure of your words. They signal clearly, often without explanation, what behavior you will and will not tolerate. This is especially crucial when dealing with narcissists because they are experts at testing, bending, and violating boundaries that are not firmly expressed. Narcissists operate by pushing limits. They subtly test how far they can go through comments, actions, and emotional manipulation. They watch your responses closely, looking for hesitation, guilt, or the need to explain yourself. When they sense weakness in your language, soft phrases, over-explaining, apologizing for boundaries, they exploit it. This is why vague or emotionally reactive communication often fails with narcissistic personalities. They interpret hesitation as permission. The strength of your language determines the strength of your invisible boundaries. One of the most effective linguistic tools is concise statements. Narcissists thrive in drawn-out conversations where they can twist words, derail logic, and exhaust your emotional energy. Short, firm phrases cut through that manipulation. Statements like, "That's not acceptable," "I've already answered," or "I disagree," are boundaries in verbal form. They leave little room for debate, and more importantly, they shift the burden back onto the narcissist. Instead of explaining or defending, you're asserting. Clear language disrupts their usual power tactics because it denies them the emotional chaos they depend on. Tone is just as critical as wording. A calm, steady tone reinforces invisible boundaries far more effectively than shouting or pleading. Narcissists are skilled at using emotional reactions against you. If you get angry, they call you unstable. If you cry, they call you manipulative. If you defend yourself, they twist your words. But a neutral, composed tone leaves them with nothing to grab onto. It communicates that your boundary is not up for negotiation, that you are not entering their emotional game. Your language becomes like a wall, firm, quiet, unmovable. Another linguistic strategy is refusing to over-explain. Many people, especially empathetic ones, feel compelled to justify their boundaries so that the other person understands and agrees. But narcissists don't respect explanations. They use them as entry points to argue, minimize, or manipulate. If you say, I don't want to talk about this right now because it's making me uncomfortable, they'll challenge your feelings, accuse you of overreacting, or find loopholes. If you simply say, I'm not discussing this, and stop there, they have less room to maneuver. The absence of explanation is a form of invisible boundary because it denies them the conversational hooks they rely on. Repetition is another powerful technique. Narcissists often try to wear people down through persistence. They repeat the same questions, demands, or accusations, hoping you'll eventually give in. Repeating your boundary in the same calm, firm way each time is a silent assertion of control. For example, if they keep asking the same intrusive question, calmly responding with, I already answered that, each time creates a linguistic wall they cannot easily bypass. You're not giving new information, emotional fuel, or alternative paths. You're holding the line with language. Strategic silence can also be a boundary-setting tool. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Silence in response to manipulative comments, baiting, or boundary violations communicates that their behavior does not deserve engagement. Narcissists depend on reactions. Silence deprives them of it. But silence is most effective when paired with clear language at other times. If silence is your only response, they may interpret it as confusion or weakness. But when it's used strategically after a clear statement, it reinforces the message with quiet strength. Phrasing boundaries as statements rather than questions is another subtle but important shift. Questions like, can you not talk to me that way? Or, do you think that's fair? Hand over power because they invite negotiation or argument. Statements like, don't talk to me that way, or that's not fair, are definitive. They don't ask for permission, they declare reality. Narcissists look for openings, and questions give them one. Firm statements close that door. There's also a psychological layer to language that sets invisible boundaries, your belief behind the words. If you speak a boundary while doubting yourself, the narcissist will sense it. If you apologize for asserting your needs, they'll take it as weakness. But if you speak with quiet conviction, even simple phrases carry weight. Words like, stop, no, that's enough, or this conversation is over, become powerful not because they're complicated, but because they're backed by internal certainty. The boundary is not just in the language, it's in the energy beneath it. Invisible boundaries through language also rely on consistency. Narcissists will test you repeatedly to see if your words match your actions. If you say, I won't tolerate this, but continue to engage when they cross the line, your words lose power. But if your language remains firm and your behavior aligns with it each time, they slowly learn that the boundary is real. This is not about changing them. It's about establishing the terms under which you will interact. Another subtle but effective linguistic boundary is naming behavior without emotional charge. Narcissists often manipulate by pretending not to understand or by reframing the situation. If you calmly name the behavior, you're interrupting me, you're raising your voice, you're shifting the topic, you strip away their ability to control the narrative. It forces them to confront what they're doing without giving them emotional ammunition. This kind of language functions like turning on a light in a dark room. Their manipulation thrives in ambiguity. Naming makes it visible. Ultimately, language that sets invisible boundaries is about reclaiming control of your psychological space. It allows you to protect yourself without escalating conflict, arguing endlessly, or justifying your worth. Narcissists rely on emotional entanglement and conversational chaos to dominate. Clear, firm, calm language removes the fog and establishes an unspoken line they can sense but cannot easily cross. It transforms communication from a battlefield into a structure where your self-respect stands quietly but unmistakably at the center. Authenticity is one of the most powerful forces in human interaction, but it becomes especially significant when dealing with narcissists. Narcissists thrive in environments where illusions, facades, and emotional games dominate. They rely on confusion, projection, and manipulation to maintain control over others. Their entire psychological strategy is built on keeping people off balance, questioning themselves, and adjusting their behavior to accommodate the narcissist's shifting moods and expectations. Authenticity disrupts this dynamic completely. It exposes the gap between their carefully crafted image and the reality they desperately try to hide. It brings light to a space they want to keep dark. And that is why authenticity functions as their kryptonite. At its core, authenticity means being grounded in your truth. It is the ability to express thoughts, emotions, and boundaries clearly without filtering them to please, appease, or manipulate others. Authentic people do not rely on masks to navigate relationships. They speak honestly, act consistently, and refuse to participate in psychological games. For narcissists, this is profoundly unsettling. They expect people to bend, to doubt themselves, and to modify their behavior under pressure. When they encounter someone who doesn't do that, someone who stands firmly in their reality, it destabilizes their entire control structure. Narcissists operate by creating emotional fog. They distort reality through tactics like gaslighting, blame shifting, and emotional baiting. Their goal is to control the narrative and dictate how others perceive themselves and the situation. Authenticity cuts through this fog like a sharp blade. When you clearly name what's happening, state your boundaries, or express your feelings without shame or defensiveness, their manipulative tactics lose their effectiveness. They depend on others accepting their version of reality without question. Authentic individuals refuse to surrender their perception to someone else's distortions. This refusal to play along threatens the narcissist's ego in a way few things can. Narcissists construct a false self-image that demands admiration and obedience. When someone is authentic, they don't feed that image. They don't give exaggerated praise. They don't play subordinate roles, and they don't let flattery or intimidation dictate their behavior. Authentic people see through the performance. They respond to reality, not the persona. This is why narcissists often either try to control or discredit authentic individuals. They can't easily manipulate someone who won't enter their psychological theater. One of the ways authenticity acts as kryptonite is through emotional transparency. Narcissists rely on emotional reactions they can exploit. If you become defensive, they twist your words. If you become overly apologetic, they gain leverage. But authenticity allows you to express emotions in a clear and regulated way. Instead of yelling or retreating, you might calmly say, "I'm not okay," with how you're speaking to me, or that's not accurate, and I won't accept it as truth. This type of direct honesty is not something narcissists are equipped to handle. Their manipulation relies on others losing emotional clarity. When you maintain it, they lose power. Authenticity also dismantles one of their favorite tactics, projection. Narcissists often project their own flaws and insecurities onto others, accusing them of what they themselves are doing. This tactic works best when the target is insecure or eager to defend themselves. But authentic people don't absorb projections. If a narcissist accuses them unfairly, they can calmly respond with, "That's not true," or simply refuse to engage. They don't internalize false narratives because their sense of self isn't dependent on external approval. This unnerves narcissists because projection is one of their primary defense mechanisms. When it doesn't stick, they are forced to face their own reflection, something they desperately avoid. Authenticity creates boundaries without needing constant explanation. A narcissist might try to guilt trip you for saying no, or accuse you of being selfish for prioritizing your needs. An authentic person doesn't crumble under these tactics. They don't feel compelled to prove their goodness or justify their boundaries endlessly. They know their values and limits, and they communicate them clearly. This kind of unapologetic clarity is foreign to narcissists who rely on guilt, obligation, and emotional manipulation to keep people compliant. Authenticity removes those tools from their hands. Another powerful aspect of authenticity is consistency. Narcissists thrive in relationships where people are unpredictable, emotionally volatile, or easily influenced. This allows them to exploit changing moods and shifting dynamics to their advantage. Authentic people, on the other hand, are consistent in their values, behavior, and responses. They are not easily swayed by pressure or flattery. This consistency makes it difficult for narcissists to find leverage points. They can't use sudden emotional shifts or contradictions to destabilize someone who isn't playing that game. Authenticity also acts as a mirror. Narcissists avoid self-reflection at all costs because looking inward would force them to confront their insecurities, lies, and unresolved shame. When they interact with authentic individuals, their usual defenses falter. Authentic people don't mirror back the narcissist's delusions. They reflect reality. This can provoke discomfort, anger, or even hostility, but it's also why narcissists often feel exposed in the presence of authenticity. They cannot maintain their facade as easily when someone is calmly holding up a mirror. It's important to recognize that authenticity is not about confrontation for the sake of confrontation. It's about being anchored in your truth, regardless of how the narcissist reacts. You don't have to shout, prove your worth, or dismantle their illusions aggressively. Simply standing in your authenticity, speaking plainly, setting clear boundaries, and refusing to accept distorted narratives is enough to undermine their control. Narcissists can argue with opinions, but they struggle to argue with quiet, unwavering truth. Authenticity also disrupts the unspoken psychological contracts narcissists try to create. They expect others to play roles the admirer, the fixer, the scapegoat, the rescuer, or the silent enabler. Authentic people refuse those roles. They engage as equals, not subordinates. They refuse to carry emotional burdens that aren't theirs. They don't cater to fragile egos or pretend to believe lies for the sake of harmony. This rejection of unspoken contracts destabilizes the narcissist's entire system of control, because those roles are how they maintain dominance in relationships. Another key reason authenticity weakens narcissists is that it removes unpredictability. Narcissists depend on emotional games to keep people guessing. They alternate between idealization and devaluation, praise and criticism, warmth and coldness. This unpredictability is designed to keep others seeking approval and questioning themselves. Authentic individuals do not chase approval. They know who they are and what they stand for. This stability makes it impossible for narcissists to manipulate through uncertainty. When authenticity enters the dynamic, the narcissist loses control over the narrative. Their usual tactics, confusion, projection, emotional baiting, start to falter. Authentic people don't give them the reaction they expect. And they don't accept the stories they try to impose. This forces the narcissist into uncomfortable psychological territory where their illusions are at risk of crumbling and their strategies lose effectiveness. Authenticity, in its quiet and unwavering strength, exposes what manipulation tries to hide. It turns the power dynamic upside down, not through force, but through the simple act of being real